Congressman-elect Goldman, let's start with you. You will be serving with Congressman-elect Santos in a matter of days, unless something changes dramatically between now and then for him. Talk to us just about that reality, that this person may come into Congress on the backs of all these lies, and also talk to us about the financial threads you think should be investigated.
Well, look, the sad reality is that this Republican Party and its leadership has not made a single comment about the extreme series and web of lies that George Santos continues to perpetrate. He ostensibly came forward to apologize, but continues to lie about his Jewish religion. He is not Jewish, but yet he claims he is, quote, Jewish, which as a Jew, I find incredibly offensive. But his web of lies deceived the voters and the voters who voted for Steve. And I'm interested to hear what he has to say about that. But it's not being rebuked by House leadership. There's no comment. And what it really just goes to say is that George Santos's view of elections is very consistent with Republicans' view of elections, is that they no longer need to be free and fair. They just need to make sure that Republicans win. And in addition to his lies about his background, his education, his work experience, his religion, his properties, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. He's got real suspicious financial activity. And I think the easiest way to explain it is there are either two situations here, both of which are bad for him. One is that he used his entity that he created as a pass-through for donors to far exceed campaign finance limits by essentially giving his corporation money, which then Santos transferred from the corporation to his own bank account and then from his bank account to his campaign. That's a violation of campaign finance laws. But even if it was legitimate, and even if somehow this corporation that was created a year ago all of a sudden had millions of dollars of, quote, contracts or agreements, it still is illegal because then Santos is the pass-through for a corporation to give to his own campaign. So these financial investigations that we are now learning are going. I'm happy that the Eastern District of New York heeded my call to investigate him for federal violations of the campaign finance laws. They're going to dig into this because even his explanation, the quote, multi-million dollar, a couple of million-dollar agreements, he has said what he did is, quote, capital introduction. You don't have a contract for capital introduction. It's essentially serving as a broker where you get referral fees and you don't enter into a contract. And so what we know is that very wealthy Republican donors had agreements with Santos. The Daily Beast reported that. But that really begs the question as to whether this is just a way to funnel more money into his campaign in order to flip a seat in New York.
Well, Steve, your latest op-ed for The Atlantic is titled How a Perfectly Normal New York Suburb Elected a Con Man. And you write in part, quote, how did George Santos, a Republican newly elected to New York's 3rd Congressional District on Long Island, get away with running for office with an almost completely fictitious resume? The answer is a combination of Democratic complacency, Republican extremism, and media decline in a House district that I know intimately. We shouldn't let the Republican Party off the hook. Republicans accepted Santos's narrative without due diligence because they prioritized extreme ideology over actual qualifications. Santos was at the Ellipse on January the 6th, 2021, and has even claimed that he helped arrested insurrectionists with their legal fees. Politicians embellish their resumes. If that were a crime, every candidate in America would be put in prison. But Santos's lies are an assault on democratic norms. The Republicans should have vetted Santos. The Democrats should have checked him out more thoroughly. The media should have as well. It's a shame for my old district, but it's more than that for the country. This should be a warning. There were failures on multiple levels in this election, leading someone unfit for office to attain it through willful deception. The chief casualty of this election was the truth. Steve, it's such a it's such an interesting point that you raised, partly about the Republican Party and their desire to get power. And we saw this in Georgia with Herschel Walker. A kind of similar narrative took place down there. But it also points to me to something bigger, which is this realization that we all have that democracy is built partly on rules and laws that are written down, but it's also built partly on customs and norms. And once those customs and norms get broken, the system itself is increasingly fragile.
Well, you're exactly right. And democracy requires one other thing, and that is transparency. It requires investigative journalism. This would not have happened had the media, both local and national, had the resources to really focus on Mr. Santos. I mean, what is integral to this is that nobody took this guy seriously. Long Island, my former congressional district, my former constituents, they will tolerate disagreement, but not dishonesty. The reason that dishonesty was able to thrive was that Mr. Santos wasn't taken seriously. Nobody believed he could win. When his opponent, his Democratic opponent, Mr. Zimmerman, received the opposition research, saw those red flags, and brought those red flags to the attention of many in the local media, the response was, this guy's not going to win. This is not a story. He's a tree that fell in the forest. The consolidation of print journalism, the reduction in budgets for journalists, the emasculation of investigative news units is what allowed Mr. Santos to fly under the radar. If democracy is going to prevail, we actually need to hold candidates more accountable. The best way of doing that is to make sure that they can be investigated by journalists in markets and communities like the ones I used to represent.
Let me jump in right there. I agree with that point to a degree. The reason we are talking about George Santos right now is precisely because of journalism. The New York Times exposed the lies of his resume. Now, it was after the election, which is the issue here. And of course, I can't disagree with the idea that newspapers have been gutted and deserve more resources, and that more investigative journalism would be advantageous for us writ large as a society. So I just want to make that point. But I guess I would take what the former congressman said and direct it to the incoming congressman, Dan, to ask him about the culpability in this case of the New York Democratic Party, which has come under a lot of criticism for not properly going after George Santos prior to the election. Do you think that the New York Democratic Party has some introspection here, or it should undertake some introspection here? And what changes would you like to see for your neck of the woods, as I acknowledge journalism in our industry needs to have some introspection as well?
Look, I think these are all interesting conversations, but they miss the point. It is not investigative journalism's fault or the Democrats' fault that we have a con man who absolutely obliterated the truth in order to get elected. That is George Santos's fault, and that needs to be where the conversation is. This guy is clearly an inveterate fraudster who continues to lie and lie and lie. It's not the media's fault. It's not the Democrats' fault. It's George Santos's fault. And it's now the Republican Party's fault because they're not speaking out against him, and they're welcoming him into Congress because they have become an anti-democratic party that does not care about free and fair elections. Instead, they care about power, they care about winning, and they'll do it at all costs. And we saw it with Donald Trump in 2020. We have seen a rejection of it across the country in the most recent elections. But George Santos is the continuation of that attack on democracy. And until the Republican Party will stand up for democracy, that is the greatest threat to our country. It's not lack of funding for journalism. It's not the fact that the Democrats' opposition research may have left something to be desired. It's the fact that George Santos felt welcome in a party to essentially deceive his voters and potentially break the law in doing so that he could be elected.
Lots of blame to go around, but most squarely on the Republicans, and that includes Kevin McCarthy, who has remained silent, Steve, because he is counting on George Santos's vote. So you were in Congress a long time. Tell us a little bit about that dynamic, how you foresee these next few days, the first week or two of Santos's time in office, assuming he does get there, and we have every reason to believe that he will. What's it going to be like for him in the halls of the Capitol, particularly with the McCarthy speakership in the balance?
Well, two things. First, Long Islanders and the country deserve better than George Santos. He will begin on January 3rd, assuming he takes his oath of office, rather ironic, by the way. He will begin not focused on things like infrastructure and the environment and the tax burden on Long Island. He's going to begin his term thinking about himself, thinking about a potential Office of Congressional Ethics investigation, thinking about an Ethics Committee investigation, thinking about a Nassau County District Attorney's investigation, a New York State Attorney General's investigation, and a federal investigation. So this guy begins with a disservice, unable to discharge his duties as a representative, having to deal with all of these legal problems. Secondly, let's understand exactly what the dynamic is going to be with respect to Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans in Congress. They are playing for time. Kevin McCarthy cannot afford to lose a Republican vote in his quest for Speaker on January 3rd. So my assumption, and the assumption of many of my former colleagues, is they're going to do what they have to do to keep this guy in his seat, as undeserved as it is, until at least January 3rd. But that raises another problem for Mr. McCarthy and the Republicans, and that is if Mr. Santos is forced to resign, or if he loses his seat somehow before the next election, that triggers a special election. As Dan knows, the last thing a new Republican majority wants to deal with is a special election on Long Island that they are likely to lose. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to begin a narrative that just as they took the slim majority, they're on the verge of losing it. So I believe that despite the very serious legal and political problems that Mr. Santos has, they're going to do everything they can to get through the next 2 years. This guy's not going to run in 2 years. They're going to do everything they can to just get through the next 2 years without a special election.